the Northwest Passage is a huge opportunity for Canada, where historically we have not done a good enough job to assert our sovereignty over it, um, and that has led to threats from Russia.
Are you more optimistic about the next generation and its ability to create real change for the better in our society?
Sorb, I think the jury is still out on that. I think our generation is facing unprecedented challenges. Generalized anxiety is the highest it's ever been reported in history.
Welcome to the Opportunity Index. I'm Sorbanani, your host and founder. And at the Opportunity Index, we explore how policy, economics, and leadership shape opportunities for the young people of today and the leaders of tomorrow. And today, I'm proudly here with James Knight, Boston College Carroll School of Management student, founder of NextGen Political Strategies, the leading political consultant and strategies firm in Canada, and recipient of King Charles III Coronation Medal, award to those who have made significant contributions to Canada. Very excited, and let's dig into it. James, you've worked at the intersection of politics, strategy, and execution, and have a real entrepreneurial spirit from what I can tell, which is exactly what we like to see here on the Opportunity Index. James, now, before we talk about strategy, politics, or anything about entrepreneurship, what do we need to understand about your upbringing, childhood, and early environment to really understand who is sitting right in front of me right now?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it. I would say my parents are very much responsible for the person I've become today. I mean, they provided me with an amazing household to grow up in, where politics and real estate and business were at the forefront of, dinner table discussions from a young age. I grew up watching 60 Minutes with my dad every Sunday from a fairly young age, and the news with him most nights with my parents. And so I think putting me in an environment where I was exposed to a lot of different world issues, local issues, national issues, put me in a good spot to be an aware person going forward.
Thank you, James. That's great insight. But I want to take a look at the recent Canadian politics, right? Pierre Poilievre, like he's been an energized, he's energized a younger, more economically frustrated and focused base in a way we haven't seen in Canada in years. At the same time, though, Conservatives held roughly a 20-point lead prior to Mark Carney's introduction. Where do you think the gap or shift of votes came from?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw in the last federal election was a shifting in how older voters, mostly 55 plus, particularly female voters, were going to vote. That's typically a strong base for the federal Conservative Party, and what we saw was a shift to Mark Carney's Liberals, and I think the Liberals were able to present a better vision of stability for the country. Um, which, on the other hand, is why I think Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives perform so strongly with young voters. Young voters overwhelmingly vote on values, and Pierre Poilievre was able to talk directly to them about their aspirations, their ability to start a family, start a business, to live a life better than their parents, to live the Canadian dream, um, as he puts it often. And so, to come back to your question, I think that's where we saw the biggest shift was young people went way more conservative, older voters went way more liberal.
You know, um, I completely agree with that and everything you just said, especially about how Pure really made a connection with those younger voters and just having a more idyllic and better future for themselves compared to their maybe their mom and dad or their parents. Now, but let's take a look down south past the border. Um, let's say Donald Trump showed quite a well good and powerful and identity based marketing this election, right? And I believe politics, maybe you don't either, doesn't live in Parliament or Congress or the White House anymore. It lives more in culture and media and markets. Few figures illustrate that better than Donald Trump, regardless of whether people view him negatively or positively, left or right. That is irrelevant. He has become a constant global reference point. Over the past year, he's dominated political headlines and he's dominated attention itself, becoming a household conversation starter and Thanksgiving role player. When you look at Trump purely as a strategist, setting ideology aside, what do you think Trump understands that better than everyone right now about attention, branding, and controlling the narrative in modern politics?
Yeah, for sure. I think you're astute to say that politics is very much a part of culture today and, less on the periphery than it has been in the past. And I think Donald Trump, for a long time in his career, going back to business and being in real estate, has really encapsulated that. He's always been a part of the culture, regardless of whether he was doing politics or business. And so I think he was able to effectively carry that over. For better or for worse, we can debate that. But nonetheless, he was on all the podcasts. He understood that that's where young voters were able to be reached, and fundamentally was able to capitalize on that attraction. I think going back way back to his business days.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially on that, like the podcast point, how he went on the Joe Rogan show. Kamala and Biden did not, and that them turning that down really led to the downfall of their side of the election. So now, if we shift to geopolitics for a moment, I want to maybe take into consideration how Canada talks a lot about Arctic sovereignty, right? But Russia is very rapidly expanding its icebreaker fleet and presence in our northern waters. From an economic and security standpoint, do you think Canada is underestimating Arctic as an economic or strategic priority?
Oh, for sure. In the last couple months, I've been helping out a friend, just reading over some of his work on Arctic policy for Canada. He's been published by Queen's University now and is working on a couple other papers. And so I've seen firsthand, through his research, what's going on up there. Well, really the lack of what is going on up there. I think water is going to be a huge component of the future quarters of the 2000s, 2025 onward, whether that's access to water for drinking. Canada's vast, especially in the north, our vast access to clean drinking water, but geopolitically in access to navigable shipping waters. And so the Northwest Passage is a huge opportunity for Canada, where historically we have not done a good enough job to assert our sovereignty over it. And that has led to threats from Russia, where we could have a very valuable resource in navigable waters through the Arctic. But right now, we're not developing properly up there, and therefore we're vulnerable for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Completely agreed. I've been thinking about all those points for the past few months. Why isn't Canada utilizing the Arctic to its full potential? Our greatest asset as Canada. Now, over time, what belief about leadership or politics have you had to almost unlearn as you've gained more responsibility, experience, and just, I guess, a more flow in, well, your profession?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And a lot of politicians, a lot of folks who got into politics later in life would have a better answer for you than I would. I learned politics from the ground up. I started on my first political campaign when I was 13, and took on a leadership role in that campaign and future campaigns shortly thereafter. And so I don't think I've had to unlearn anything in politics because I've learned it from the ground up. Definitely have adapted, certain things, how to communicate with voters, how to react on different issues or not react. Um, but I think it's been more of a ground up rather than top down building of my knowledge base.
Awesome. That's really insightful, especially considering how, well, I guess you started so early on, and especially considering, well, founders typically or people who found businesses and are entrepreneurs typically found their businesses later on in their life after university or maybe like a higher education. And that's incredibly interesting and empowering that you actually took it into your own hands to spearhead this initiative and do it yourself, right? Well, now, founders often talk about vision, but the reality is trade off and pressure. What's one lesson you've learned early on building something that no classroom or internship or any educational experience could have really taught you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think for me, it's been all about listening. Um, Regardless of whether I'm in the leadership role or not, I've often found myself in a leadership role on political campaigns in the last couple years. I know I'm not going to be the most experienced person in the room, and I'm starting to get to a point in my career um, where maybe I am more experienced, but early on it had to come down to listening, knowing that you could learn from every single person in the room, and that every single person in the room had unique good ideas to contribute, especially when you're so young, is super valuable and really helped me.
Wow, that's incredibly insightful considering like how young you were again in those rooms with those older people, and it's like I guess it's kind of different because maybe back then you were so used to being the standout in the room, someone who's the main participant and has the best ideas. And it might be a shock almost, right? If all of a sudden you have these incredible people who are sitting right beside you and sharing ideas beside you. Was it a bit of a shock at first almost? Like it was shock like you weren't used to it almost?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, if you're ever the smartest person in a room, you're in the wrong room. You should always put yourself in a position that you can learn from someone else in the room. Um, so I wouldn't say it was a shock to enter those kind of spaces. I'd say it was more not relaxing, but you know, reinvigorating to be in rooms where I could learn and I was always learning because that's the best thing to develop as a person, I think, and a professional and an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay, so knowing this, that you've supported initiatives aimed at, I don't know, youth engagement as well, right? Rather than just being a political commentator or any commentary at all. What convinced you that building something like NextGen was the right move instead of working entirely within existing institutions at first?
Yeah, sure. So I founded NextGen about 18 months ago now. And since then we've grown fairly rapidly. We've now touched campaigns at all levels of government in Canada, and have some exciting projects coming down the line. I think for me, I had been doing work independently in politics for a couple years at that point and said, how can I get more young people to be able to do what I was able to do if that's what they so choose? And so by starting a company, I'm able to connect young people who are interested in working on campaigns, give them some training, and then introduce them to candidates or assist on projects that I'm working on. Whereas older, more well established political strategy companies may not be willing to do that. They're more focused on experience. So I think part of it was just starting the company in order to give back, in a sense, and to help uplift other young people that are interested so that, you know, they're able to do what I was able to do.
Awesome. That fits the exact like what we're looking for at the opportunity index, right? We're trying to find people who are engaging with youth and empower students in our future, right? So that is incredible. Um, Moving on, in politics and business, I mean, reputation can take years to build and seconds to lose. You can lose it within the matter of seconds. So, how do you personally think about protecting your ethos and credibility while still being able to take risks and not being so, well, grounded?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lesson I learned early on is that you have to read over your work 15 times before it gets published. So, early on, we put out a post, it had a typo. It had happened with our company a couple of times. It's not a big deal. You can go back and edit it, up until a certain point if you catch it, but those are just mistakes that shouldn't happen. And so attention to detail can really help with maintaining your reputation. Especially as a young person, people are looking for what's wrong with what you're doing. They're looking for where your inexperience may show. And so something I've continued to develop is having that attention to detail. Because, as you said, it takes one second, one word, and your reputation's damaged.
Okay, well, that is an honest truth. And I guess a lot of the time, right, it's you have to go through the boring stuff and do the fine reading to be able to just really maintain yourself and keep yourself level headed, right? So now, a lot of students like I speak to are genuinely motivated. They care. They want to build things and they're willing to do the work. And I don't know, get their hands dirty, right? But they are also overwhelmed by choice. There are so many different paths. I don't know, academics, extracurriculars, internships, hell, I don't know, drop shipping like Dubai. And the pressure to optimize early can make it hard to know where to start. For the students, or for students in general, who feel driven but unsure where to focus their energy without spreading themselves, well, too thin, what advice would you give?
For sure. I think fundamentally, if you have a passion, pursue it. Um, my dad would always say, "Do what you love, and the money will follow." If money and wealth is something that is important to you in your future development, some people prefer giving back and doing other things and impact in different ways. But I think for young entrepreneurs, that's often a driving factor. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if you have a passion, dive into it. Be the best in your class at it. Be the best at your school at it. Be the best in your city at it, your province. All of course within the frame of still being a young person and knowing that you still have room to grow and develop and learn. Um, I'd say that that's sort of my answer to that there.
Yeah, awesome. And that's exactly what Warren Buffett said, right? You have to be the best at one thing, whether it's solving the Rubik's Cube, playing FIFA, or FIFA 19 for that, whatever. You have to be the best at your niche. The best, you have to be the best at something, right?
But I'll jump in and I'll say that you don't want to be a perfectionist. Attention to detail is important, but so many young entrepreneurs, so many young people get caught up in their own heads. Well, what if this isn't perfect? What if this doesn't work? And that's where taking risks is also equally important. So, the fixation about being the best, it's a great goal to have. It's a great thing to naturally develop and work to. But I find those that want to be the best often burn out because they can't take a moment to step back and appreciate their achievements. So, for me, of course, I'm always looking for the next campaign. I'm looking to network. I'm looking to meet the next great candidate in our province, in our city, in our country. But you also have to take a moment and say, well, city council candidates are reaching out to me and people on the school board trust me and want my advice on things. And those are absolutely wins too. And so you shouldn't always just be focused on the big, shiny object.
Yeah, of course. Now, James, as we wrap up, and thank you so much for your insight and well thoughtful answers. Um, I want to ask one question. I plan to ask it to every guest and interviewee on this channel, and I guess you're the first one. Are you more optimistic about the next generation and its ability to create real change for the better in our society?
Sorb, I think the jury is still out on that. I think our generation is facing unprecedented challenges with the rise of social media, artificial intelligence. Generalized anxiety is the highest it's ever been reported in history. And so I think our generation has a lot to overcome, but I also see immense creativity, immense entrepreneurship, and an immense desire for change and enrichment in our generation. And so I think we need another decade to tell how all of those different factors, the positives and the negatives, are going to shake out for us. But I think our generation certainly has a lot of incredibly positive characteristics that will serve it well as we enter the workforce and become the dominant generation in that regard.